Thanks, Jacinta, and apologies for jumping the gun, but I kind of realized that apart from the housekeeping, I'm the only thing that stood between you and a drink. And having worked in tourism for 30 years, I know that that's a very scary place to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the timer on and try and make sure I keep to time, because I'm glad Jacinta thinks it's fascinating, because I do too. So what we really want to do is to give you a sneak preview of some research that we're very proud to be partnering with Luxperience on, but in a sense also partnering with many of you in the audience. Some of you, and Candy, for example, have already helped me. So what we're going to do is try and give you a little sneak peek so that, you know, the northern lights through the tent, to give you a sense of some of the things that we found out. So 10 minutes to do the entire overview of luxury travel. It's going to be quite interesting. And as I said, the research is not complete yet. We're in the process of doing it right now. We're going to be, my colleague Angela Teakin will be at Luxperience talking about that. I'll be dodging around on it as well. So we do encourage you to come and participate. But this is a few highlights from the story so far. So we're really only at the start of our journey. And what I thought I'd do is kind of take 2 or 3 key themes that were really quite interesting for me in doing this. One of those was the big picture. I think if you're going to predict the future, you do need to look at that. The second is there were some questions from the floor earlier about, you know, who are the customers, who are we looking for, how do we identify them? And then a couple of little issues which emerged. Now, one of them is not a new issue, but sometimes everything old is new again is a huge trend that we do tend to see. So the first of those was, again, if you're looking to the future, if you're trying to predict what's the next thing to come for you and your clients, one thing I would say is it's always good to look at the mega trends. And for me, an insight, sometimes we think of luxury as being so distinct from everything else in travel, in life. One of the most fascinating things for me in the initial desk literature research that I did was actually to realize we're not as disconnected from the rest of the world as we like to think we are. And I think actually the panel touched on this in some of their material. When if we look at the area of areas like rising inequality, so this is just one macro trend that I picked up. Luxury travel predicts these, but it also reflects them. And now, the chart on the right, I'm not expecting you to read that, by the way, particularly not when you're waiting for a drink. What that shows is some work that Credit Suisse have done where they've looked at around 100 years of levels of wealth inequality. And what we basically see is that at the moment, since about 1980, we have been in a trend where while there is global rising wealth, there is global rising inequality. So fewer and fewer people have more and more share, have a larger and larger share of that wealth. If you take a country like Russia, I think something like, I think 1% of the population in Russia has about 25% of that country's wealth. So on the one hand, you see that growing wealth, we have that uber wealthy client that many of you in the room are trying to serve. But on the other side, what we have is the broader social reaction to that, particularly exacerbated when we see global economic crashes. In fact, normally when we see these levels of rising inequality, a few times we've seen them in the past. Greece became a democracy in 4000 BC. The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution and World War I. These were the last times we saw those. And we see a reaction to that, and we live in a much larger echo chamber than in those days. So we've seen things like the Occupy movement come in and react to that idea. So what does that mean? So actually, I mean, the panel earlier touched on this in terms of business events, but it's actually also true for luxury travel. It's not just about the fact that we love experience. One of the reasons we're building experiential travel is that luxury trends react to that external environment. So that focus on putting something back, triple bottom line tourism, sustainable luxury tourism, good example, El Nido Resort in the Philippines, which is, it puts money into the local community, it's a fully eco-sustainable, and it's a fabulous luxury experience. So that's there. But similarly, things where we're putting the walls around luxury. So all of those things are there. So one question I'd like you to think about, is the Occupy movement changing what it means to do luxury travel? And what are the other macro trends that might start to affect that? When we look at some of those macro trends, we tend to think of them as one single thing. I'd like to say to you that for most, the action and reaction, the laws of physics, the laws of thermodynamics apply to what happens in what we do as they do in everything else. You'll often see a little mini counter trend. And actually, both of those can create opportunities to plan for the future when you are looking at luxury travel. For anyone, I don't think there could be anyone in this room who doesn't think that we live in a world of extraordinary and rapid technological change. And that's created opportunities. So some of the stuff that my good friend Dr. Matt McDougall was talking about around that massive data is enabling us to predict and work with clients in ever better ways. But at the same time, what we're seeing as a result of that hypertech, particularly because of who luxury consumers are, we're seeing that desire for de-teching. So that's not necessarily new news. But to me, what's exciting is both those trends and counter-trends do create opportunities for us to do things. As long as we remember, now one of the hardest things in the world, and Ilana touched on this, is what's luxury? I lived in the Soviet Union in the 80s for a year, and I quite regularly ate caviar. I got so excited when I got to eat a banana. Bananas were, I love both. I continue to, it's a very bad place to acquire a taste for having caviar frequently, I would say. But the essence, I think what you can both see from both of those trends is think about applying them to your business, remembering that the essence of luxury, the one thing that's consistently runs through it, rarity or scarcity. So what is it that is unique, that is hidden? That is always going to be it. Luxury equals rarity. The other thing I think is very important about this sector, there's been a big trend, we talk about the consumer taking over and doing everything themselves and more of done for me. But I think it's worth stepping back and remembering, and probably this is not the audience where I need to do more than observe this point, is to say, when we're talking about luxury travelers and connecting with them, we do have to influence their friends and family. So yes, number one is there. But this is an audience where people still are prepared to pay for advice. And that for those of you who are suppliers in the industry, it's worth remembering that that's really important. But similarly, we're also using social media. So there are many different audiences we need to meet. We need to connect with our consumers. We need to inspire them. But you're not getting on that consumer's list if you're a supplier if you haven't made a good job of the luxury advisors. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly look at who are these two groups of people. Now, we've talked a little bit today about archetypes. We've talked about branding. And we've talked about psychological needs. And Anush touched on that. And Corey's touched on the idea of archetypes as well. I've probably, in the last 15 years, I've interviewed hundreds of both events organizers and luxury travel organizers. And one thing I would say about them is there is a very distinct personality type that you have to address. And if I put this into the kind of psychological way of looking at this that branding and marketing experts use around the world, and I'm hoping those of you who are luxury buyers in the audience, recognize yourself. You're magicians. And you have a very specific type. Your desire is to take lots of things that are going on in the world and to know them, to understand them, and to use them to create magic. And what I've also found very, very commonly to do that is that the one big fear of the luxury travel buyer is negative consequence that they cannot predict. So if you are a luxury supplier, make sure that they accept things will go wrong. They expect you to work out and make sure that it never does. So I think that they are very, very creative people. researchers sit in the archetype next door. We tend to be sages. We want to know everything in the world and share everything in the world. And we share characteristics. So you are sage, you are wise magicians. You want and value knowledge and insight. And we heard that earlier in the conversation around wanting to know things. I also like to know this group of people as the creative control freak, which is a very, very rare combination. I don't think you realize sometimes how unique and rare you are. But if everyone who's good at doing this is that, what I'd invite you who are buyers in the audience to think is, what kind of magician are you? Are you Gandalf? Are you Dumbledore? Are you Merlin? Are you Melisandre? That's your point of difference, but it's also about who your clients are. I thought I'd just put in, because we tend to talk about clients in the luxury sector. Almost everyone I've ever seen, just as the tourism industry needs an acronym, the luxury tourism industry is not. It's not a presentation about luxury travelers if you don't have a pyramid. So here's my pyramid. And I'm not going to spend, because I'm standing between you and a drink, and I think you're probably reasonably familiar with this, that idea of right at the top, we've got our uber luxury, we've got our core, people who regularly consume luxury. We've got our premium travelers who regularly consume market experience, occasionally tapped into luxury, and our aspirational travelers. Sometimes it's about the special occasions, and there are some of you in the room who are good at turning occasion-based travelers into permanent luxury travelers, so well done on you. And the others are around the products that we create can make travelers that. And there's also people like me. I might, spend one night in a qualia and then I'll camp out under the stars the next night. So there's all sorts of different types of consumers. But what I thought is, if we're talking magicians, who's the other side of that equation? What types of luxury travel consumers? Now, we are still verifying this in the research at the moment. And if any of you have any clients who'd love to help me find these people, when I looked at what people thought about this, and the axis of this is, the top is about extroversion, about drawing your energy from outside. The bottom is about drawing it from inside you. The right-hand side, so I'll see if I can point at this. So right over here, we've got our individuals, and over here, it's about those who build through connectivity. So 4 broad motivations: indulgence, empowerment, growth, and connection. Now, I think you could look at what we would call, I don't like the word old luxury, I like the word classic luxury. So our classic luxury might be around here, over an indulgence with our lotus eaters, as would be our jet setters. Our new luxury, our emerging luxury, around enrichment and around connection, so the growth of multi-generational travel. So I think there's something, the good news is, there's something for everyone, and where are the gaps? Who's not doing the best of satisfying the hedonists? Now, I'm not going to talk through them in detail, but just to give you a sense of a little bit of who those are. So, let's take an example like my pioneers. So these are people who really want to test themselves. They're very self-motivated people. They're not going to be someone who wants to sit on a beach. They'll want to pilot their own balloon. They're probably some of the people who signed up for Virgin Galactic. They might be joining, and this is a business events theme, the Surf Summit, which is where a group of young techie business leaders go off and they spend 2 days thinking big picture about the future and 2 days of going off and driving things. But similarly, you've got your volunteers, you've got your medical audiences. Your dynasts, so that growth of multi-generational travel is built around the idea of the family as at the heart of many business endeavors. But you've still got your hedonists. There are still people who want to party and have fun. And there's more ways than ever to do it. So they might fly in Etihad's The Residence and have a private box and mix with the drivers. But it's essentially about partying and having fun and doing various things there. So I think lots of things that we can do. And as I say, we're still very much on that journey, and we'd love your help to do more. One thing that kind of came up is, for me, that was quite interesting, and this is emerging and moving on a lot, which is most of you are dealing with clients who are not used to saying no, aren't you? And this came to my mind. If you're interested and you're not from Australia, check out on Twitter the hashtag #WarOnTerrier. And this is what happens, and interesting when your clients don't get no said to them in the right way. And what's interesting is when I've asked most of you that I've interviewed about this, you're absolutely horrified at the person who did this and put Johnny Depp in the situation where his beloved family members, because let's face it, wherever you sit, luxury or basic pets are people too these days, that should never have happened. And what you're really good at, and those of you who are suppliers to luxury buyers, you need to help them to turn no's to yes insteads. And that's what we really want to be doing. And we'll be looking at how to do that with some behavior change theory in the final report. My last couple of slides, very much Anusha's touched on this, the panel's touched on this. I'd like to ask you, how is, so this is your magician's hat of a hat. How is your EESP? What is EESP? Extra sensory service perception. The essence of a luxury experience is you know. Whether you know because you've got Dr. Matt's data, or you know you've done your touch points, or you know because of process, a luxury experience, you shouldn't be asking clients their names, you should not be checking their preferences, you shouldn't be checking them in at the check-in desk, you might be checking them in their room. Sometimes they might want the most basic room, but they'll want their own personal toiletries in there and they'll want to be checked in that room. So how are you managing the process of doing this? And it was great to hear Anush talk a little bit about that. Again, wouldn't be a tourism industry presentation without a model, and I'm not going to talk through this in detail because we are now very close to that point with the drinks. Sorry. This was a model that I built for the government of Queensland that was both academic research of the type that Anush was talking about, but also I interviewed service leaders. And what was scary was I did about 12 interviews. By interview number 5, everyone, I was like, I know what this model looks like. I had to do the last 7 interviews to convince the client that I really did know. But basically, it starts at the bottom. It starts with the vision that you have of service. It runs through your strategy. It should be operationalized in your strategy. And then, as Anush said, and all I'm doing is repeating here what she said, as Anush said, really it's about a process. Part of that process is people. Part of that process is customers. But part of that is having the processes there that constantly adjust. So it's not like taking your car into the garage, it's like building shock absorbers into your system, is how you build extra sensory service perception. And if you'd like to see the toolkit, you can just Google it, and if you Google Government of Queensland Service Quality Toolkit, you'll be able to find it. So as I said, really just a sneak peek. So thank you for letting me give you a sneak peek before we go to the big sexy part of it. If you're a luxury buyer and consumer, Ange, could you just stand up and wave? My colleague Angela Teakin will be at the desk asking you to fill in some quick online interviews. If you're a luxury supplier and you'd like to see behind the curtain in a bit more depth, you can actually come and see us and express your interest. And I've just thrown up all of our details on the screen. You can do both at luxurytravelresearch.com. And you can reach me at all of these places if you'd like to know more. I will be here for the next 3 days, but I'll be here with one of my clients as well, Pacific Fair. I'm talking to some of you about that. So that's it for the end of the day. Thank you very much for giving me so much of your time.